with the IMF?
Absolutely.
Should we kick them out?
Send it packing.
Send it packing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, or, you know, send it packing. And because in every case where countries have gone along with IMF policies, it's caused tremendous disruption. Back in the Asian economic crisis in the late 1990s, for example, those countries that bought into the IMF all had terrible financial problems. Those ones that refused the IMF programs did quite well.
In a way, we are so debt-ridden in this country that that we should be easy prey for these forces with our
well, you know,
debts.
we in the United States are very debt-ridden too. We're the biggest debtor country in the world today, and yet we're not buying into the IMF type of policies. It's interesting that the very people like Larry Summers and Paul Volcker and ones who are advisors to the Obama administration today, when they were advising the World Bank or the Federal Reserve and so on, and they were going into the developing countries, they were telling them to do exactly the opposite of what they're now telling the United States we must do. And what they're telling the United States we must do is very different from what the IMF is telling Iceland that you must do. So don't listen to the IMF.
No.
I spent many years working with the IMF and the World Bank, and it was all a subterfuge to gain more control, more power over the country's resources, and that's exactly what I'm sure is happening here.
Our resources are energy, and there has been a huge buildup of aluminium factories, and many politicians, many people sort of envisage the future of this country as being one of the largest aluminium manufacturers in the world. What do you think about this?
Well, let me ask you, do you own an aluminum company yourself?
No, I do not.
Do any Icelandic people own aluminum companies?
No, they're owned by Alcoa and...
Well, there's your answer.
Yeah.
Do you really want other people, other countries and companies from other parts of the world controlling your resources and your economy? I don't think so. You know, yes, you have tremendous energy resources here, but there's many ways you could use that. For example, this heat, you could undoubtedly grow a lot more crops year-round in big greenhouses, etc., and ship them out to the rest of the world. There's a starving world out there. There's a world that's starving for energy. Today, we don't really have a very good means for storing energy that's produced and shipping it to other places, but maybe some of your entrepreneurs could come up with that. I think there's tremendous opportunities in this computer age, in this age where everybody in the world is communicating with everyone else through cell phones and the internet. I think Iceland can use those energy resources in much better ways than selling them extremely cheaply. And I understand that's what's happening here. Yeah. That companies like Alcoa are getting an extremely good deal. And as I understand, the people of Iceland don't even know how much Alcoa is paying for that energy. So I think there's many alternatives, and you should explore those, because to have people from other countries controlling your resources is not a good deal.
So you think that letting these corporations into the country is a mistake?
Well, they're here. What's here is here, and you may not be able to reverse that process, but I think in the future you ought to very seriously consider how you can use those resources to truly benefit Icelandic people, creating your own corporations here, having your people create corporations, and use that energy to help your own people.
The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, it's a book full of strange characters, of greed and corruption and crime. Some people would say that these are wild tales. Are they?
Well, they're all true.
They're all true.
They're all true. They may be wild, but they're all true. Yeah, I wish they weren't true, but unfortunately that's the way the world goes. And in fact, everybody, all the major characters in the book are historical characters that anybody can do research on, whether it's Robert McNamara, president of the World Bank, or the Shah of Iran, or Omar Torrijos, or Jaime Roldos of Ecuador. I mean, these people are all of the record, so sure.
So do you think really that Iceland was hit by this type of people, economic hitman?
Every indication is that you have been. It's a slightly different breed from what I was doing in the developing world, but it's a very similar approach. Yes, it certainly appears that way to me. I have no doubt about it. And in fact, the United States is also being hit by people like this in a slightly different way, too. The economic hitmen are more sophisticated today than they were in the 70s when I was one of them.
Yes.
But the basic approach is the same.
Yeah. But it's also a history of, like in your other book, The Secret History of the American Empire. It's a history of imperial conquest of Iraq or Guatemala, different countries where the U.S. was forwarding its interests.
Well, you know, and I mean, I was there. I was in the trenches. I lived that life. I saw it very much from the inside. I'm also a trained economist. I could understand it from an economic standpoint. But, you know, what we see is that when the economic hitmen fail, and I mentioned the scenario of the way we work, when we fail, which isn't too often, but then what we call the jackals go in, and these are people that will either overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. So when I was unable to bring Jaime Roldos, the president of Ecuador, around, he would not accept these loans for his country. And Omar Torrijos of Panama, they were assassinated by CIA-sponsored jackals. And, you know, that's, both of those cases, they went down in these small plane crashes that there's no question for people that were on the scene of how that happened.
Yeah.
And on the few instances when the jackals also fail, then the military goes in, which is what happened in places like Iraq.
Yes. So this is a brutal history.
It's a very brutal history. It's an extremely brutal history. And, of course, the leaders of every country that are involved in this have to be aware that there are brutal people in the background. If they don't cooperate with the system, there's a risk there. That's why it has to really come from the people. We can't expect the leaders of countries, including the United States. Barack Obama has to be concerned. He has to be aware that there are menacing people there. He has to be very careful. It's got to come from the people.
Yes.
You know, in our own history of the United States, we know that, for example, slavery didn't end because Abraham Lincoln found himself in the White House. Slavery ended because the people wanted it to end, and so they put Abraham Lincoln in the White House. We didn't get out of Vietnam because Richard Nixon was anti-war. He was not. We got out of Vietnam because the people insisted, and Richard Nixon finally saw that he basically had no choice. Always it comes from the people. We can't look to our leaders to have the kind of courage or even the ability to force change unless we, the people, insist upon it. So here in Iceland, you, the people, have to insist that your resources belong to you. This is your land. You live on it. Your ancestors for hundreds of years have been here on this land, taking care of it. And now you must not sell your resources off to others and allow yourselves to be exploited this way. But it's got to come from you. You know, you can elect presidents, prime ministers, but in the end, you have to be the ones to really insist on this and unite behind your political leaders. We have to do the same thing in the United States. And so far, we're not doing a very good job at it. We have a new president, but the people aren't really getting strongly behind him at this point. I hope that changes.
Do you think the current crisis will change the situation in any way? That it will be a wake-up call, or
definitely it is a wake-up call. I've been traveling around the United States and Latin America, talking ever since Confessions came out in late 2004. Almost, you know, for a long time I've been speaking at universities, at MBA programs, to people in the general public, and I've seen a tremendous change in attitude in the past 4 years. People are becoming more aware. There's a lot of movies out like Syriana and Hotel Rwanda and Blood Diamond and
Zeitgeist. You were in a Zeitgeist too.
Yes. So there's a lot of information that's getting out there. This Dreamland, the movie that's coming out here. I mean, there's so much going on in the world now that are exposing this. I think people are becoming more conscious. Now we have to have the courage to not just be conscious, but also take actions and defend what's rightfully ours. This land is yours.
John Perkins, thank you very much for being on the program. Þetta verður sýnt með texta hér í kvöld og verður svo texta líka á netinu eins fljótt og hægt er. Ég þakka ykkur fyrir að horfa í dag. Það engin þáttur á páskadag, það var smá frí en ég tek aftur til óspiltara málana sunnudaginn eftir páska. Takk fyrir að horfa.